Hello and welcome back to another video. How are you? Hey bird. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. The patrons have spoken and I will be making this dress, the vest and jacket combination. And I'm actually kind of glad about that. I do plan on making the other bodice eventually, but I've made that pattern so many times, I wanted to step out of my comfort zone a little bit, do something new. So this is going to be very nice. So I hope you enjoy this video. Here's the bodice mock-up. I am just using the same pattern that I used for my Korean silk bodice. I'm just making it without the sleeves. However, I needed to make a new mock-up because the Korean silk bodice is designed to close up down the front with hooks and eyes, so there's no overlap for buttons. And I wanted this to button closed, so I had to extend this part that I'm gesturing to here to make it allow for buttons, and I wasn't confident enough to do that on the final fabric without making a mock-up first. I'm going to use the mock-up to transfer the pattern over to this black cotton, which is going to be the lining and interlining of the vest, and this is what I used to line my black wool walking skirt, so it's left over. The linings and the interlinings are all cut out and basted together. These are all a double thickness of fabric now, and clearly I ran out of the black cotton and I had to work with white. Now I was a little bit worried. I wanted to have all of the taffeta up against black because I thought it would look better, but it's a pretty opaque taffeta, so I don't think that there's going to be any problem with any of the white showing through. Now I had to make sure to keep the back pieces and the side back pieces completely black because there's only going to be silk covering the two front pieces, that one, and then the two side fronts, that one, and then the backs are just going to be plain cotton. This is something that you would see all the time in 19th century waistcoats because that part is going to be covered by the jacket, so nobody's ever going to see it. Why would you waste an expensive fabric on the back? I also learned the lesson from the last time I worked with silk with this pattern, and I left the seam allowance at 3/4 of an inch instead of 1/2 inch, so should I need to enlarge it at all, I will have enough fabric to do that. I also did some research and I realized that the backs of Victorian waistcoats are not generally cut like this. They're usually cut in just 1 or 2 pieces, like this one with a dart taken at the side, and I am a bit concerned, but there must have been at least one person in the 19th century who cut their waistcoat like this. Also, of the pictures that I saw, I was only able to find about 2 pictures of the backs of ladies' waistcoats. One of them was for a different type of waistcoat. This is essentially just a sleeveless bodice. One of the ones that I saw was much more low cut. The other one that I saw was very similar to this one, and it also was cut differently in the back, but there must have been at least one person in the 19th century who decided to cut their waistcoat like this, because it makes sense. Why would you reinvent the wheel, develop a whole new pattern when you have this one lying around? Say hello. You kiss? Aw, good birdie. So this is the taffeta that I bought. It's this lovely sort of steel blue color, and forgive me, it's draped sort of haphazardly over these books that I want to donate. This is the only natural lighting in the house at this point in time. Now, I'm going to have a little bit too much of it left over. When I bought it, I bought either a yard or a half yard, I can't remember. But I thought that would give me just the right amount, but it turned out to be a much wider fabric than I thought. So I'm actually going to have a little bit left over. So that's something that I need to remember to think of in the future when I'm buying fabric, to take the width into account. But this is going to get ironed, and then it's going to get pinned down and basted down to the lining and the interlining. I made a mistake sewing in this side front piece. You can see that it's come out too low, and I'm trying to give a thumbs down symbol there, but it's come out very inelegant. But I'm going to have to unpick that and stitch it back on correctly. So the pieces have all been sewn together now, and I know it doesn't look great, and I believe that's because of the massive seam allowances that I left in there. Also, it's unboned, but I think those seam allowances may have been a little bit of a mistake. They were difficult to sew accurately, so I'm not sure I'm going to do those again, but they're in there now. And I may well be glad of them before long, because now I'm going to work on doing the closings so I can try it on to see if it fits. So to do the closings, I'm going to fold up this part here underneath, and then it's going to be folded up again. The other side, the overlocked side, is going to be folded up again just to hide that overlocking, and I'm going to stitch on the buttons and sew up the buttonholes. And the buttonholes are all going to be done by hand. They did have machine-done buttonholes at the time, but their machine-done buttonholes looked a lot nicer than my machine-done buttonholes. So I'll be doing my buttonholes by hand. Well, now, I was clever to add that large seam allowance, because look what happened yet again. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And not only does it need to meet perfectly down the center, it actually needs to overlap by about 1 inch. So I'm going to have to let out pretty much all of the seams to make the waist bigger. And goodness, I don't even know. You know what actually might be easier? This is turned over by about 1 inch, by about 2 inches. Or there's some of it is hidden underneath. What I think I might actually do is just unpick this and move it down so that this actually extends more, because the fit is phenomenal. Well, it's phenomenal except for this little wrinkling bit there that you can't see because of the bad lighting. So I'm going to have to undo this part, move it all out so there's not as much room there. You see, this side is gonna have to be the buttonhole side, so I have to keep about this. I can't really undo this one much more, but I can undo this one on this side. And then I'm also gonna have to do some magicking around with the waist seams. And then there is some weirdness going on here. I'm hoping that after I take out some of the basting down here, I'm gonna trim this all down. That will get better, and put in some boning and actually get it to close, because I don't know what's going on here. And if worst comes to worst, I mean, I'm going to be wearing a jacket over this part, so nobody's going to see it anyway. But the first thing I've got to do is undo all of the stitching that I just did here, and redo it. Lucky me. How did this happen? I have made the necessary adjustments. The waist still looks really, it's not showing up very well on camera, but the waist looks terrible. It's so wrinkled. But I think with boning, it will flatten itself out. So I made some adjustments to the darts in the front, also to the side seams, and to these seams back here. You can't see that. Now the light is reflecting off my phone into my eyes, so I just hope you can see it now, to these seams here. And then I also made some alterations to this part, whatever it's called. So the next thing to do is the buttonholes. And the buttonholes, I don't have any silk thread in this kind of steel color, steely blue color. So I'm going to do the buttonholes in black silk thread, because that's the best, because I'm using this kind of like sky blue, powder blue silk thread to sew this together. That's the best match I could find, and it's good enough for just sewing the seams, since you can't really see them, but for doing buttonholes it would just look really bad. So I am going to, oh my gosh, look at that. There's dust on my mirror, and it's not really visible in real life, but it's showing up really strongly on camera. I guess I'd better get out the duster. So yeah, I'm going to do the buttonholes in black silk thread. Then I'm going to do them by hand. I will do machine buttonholes for undergarments, like this. Focus. I can wait. Okay, I'm bored of waiting. My corset cover has machine done buttonholes because nobody's going to see them except for when I film close-ups of them and put them on the internet. But for outerwear, I like to do hand-done buttonholes. They did have the technology to do machine-done buttonholes by the 1890s, but the machine-done buttonholes that they had were a lot nicer looking than the capacity that my machine has. Their machine-done buttonholes looked a lot nicer than the ones that I can do. So the nicest buttonholes that I can do are by hand. So that's what I'm going to do next. But right now it is practically 10 o'clock and I want to go to bed. All right, this took forever, but it's done now. Oh, that's not going to give you a close-up of the buttons, that's just going to give you a close-up of the phone. I am quite pleased with this. I know that the collar looks terrible. I'm aware of that. It's just too high, so I need to cut away some of this and then I'll fix it. I also know that the waistline doesn't look great either, but when I add some ties in the back here to just kind of pull everything back this way and also add in some boning, that should smooth out quite a bit. But the next thing I want to do is put the piping on the bottom. Oops, that's going to come up like that, because I didn't want to put that on before doing the closure, just in case I had to make some alterations to the sizing, and it turns out I don't. The back is a little bit big, but that's fine. I mean, since this isn't a bodice and I'm going to be wearing a jacket over it, it's okay if the back doesn't fit perfectly. And in fact, I'm going to put a thing here and actually tie it in the back, or I'll probably actually not tie it. I'll probably use like a hook and eye, or they had something in the time back in the 18 whatevers, they would actually have like a little buckle. So I might do something like that. But yeah, I'm going to put on the piping around the hem. It's also a little bit big around the, oh, you can't see it because of the phone. It's also a little bit full in the back, and it makes me look like I have a hunchback, which I don't. It's just sticking out a little bit. I do have a pretty rounded back, but I don't have a hunchback, at least not yet. Maybe I will when I'm 75, but not yet. The piping has been sewn on. It was created in the usual way, and then I sewed it on by hand with a back stitch, and it looks quite nice. However, you can see that I ran into a problem. I really wanted to avoid this, how it's poking out on either side, but it's not a huge problem. I just will need to unpick the piping on each of the little corners and flatten out the curve a little bit. Flatten the curve. COVID joke. Flatten out the curve a little bit so that they match up correctly. So it's not a huge fix. I'll be able to do it in just a few minutes. After fixing the piping, I didn't really do much with the bodice. I think I just overcast some of the interior seams. I was filming this on Halloween. I did not give out candy. I did not encourage trick-or-treaters. None came. For two reasons. One, I mean, children are walking petri dishes at the best of times, so with COVID in the air, just really did not want them near my house. And then also, whatever candy didn't get given out would then end up being stuck with me, and I'm already trying to watch my blood sugar, so I did not need that temptation around. Well, I fixed that problem. You can see it lines up very, very nicely now. So the next job is to work on putting the facings onto the Armscye. This isn't going to have sleeves. It is a vest. Vests don't have sleeves. I considered facing this with piping to make it look pretty, but literally nobody would ever see that ever, and it would be a lot of extra effort. So I just cut out some bias strips and sewed them on. I did stupidly add some extra seam allowance up towards the top, so the vest kind of sits too low down on the shoulder. Sleeve holes and Armscye in the 1890s tended to ride pretty high up on the shoulder, and that for vests that was no different, so I needed to cut off some of the excess there before sewing on the facing. This part of the video was shot on November 3rd, and I was very anxious to see whether America would once again become the paragon of democracy throughout the entire world, or whether we would become a dictatorship. In other news, though, I got the sleeve facings on, or the arm facings on, and I think they look very nice and very tidy. The next order of business was to work on the collar, and my initial plan did not involve the collar overlapping. It was supposed to just kind of meet in the middle, like this one. However, I made a mistake in cutting out the button placket, and I needed to have that part there that I'm gesturing to covered up by a collar, otherwise the raw end would just be out there. So the collar is in fact going to overlap. This is just the mock-up, don't worry, the original one, or the final one, is going to be made out of silk. The collar is going to be piped all the way around, so the first thing I did was to stitch some piping onto the neck hole of the vest. Then the next thing I did was to cut out the collar in silk, and then I actually just used one of these mock-up pieces as a lining for the collar, and in retrospect I wish I'd used something a little bit stiffer because the collar is a little bit floppy, but it's no great bother. Then I stitched by hand some piping around the edge of the silk facing inwards, and then I stitched the lining over top of that and then flipped it inside out, so the collar was had a piped edge. So this is what that process resulted in. You can see the silk with the piping and the cotton lining. So all I needed to do then was to trim down the edges and flip it the right way and sew it on to the bodice. The collar was then applied to the bodice and looks quite nice, if I do say so myself. I was not expecting this to work out as well as it did. This is the first time I'd tried something quite like this, so I was expecting disaster, which did not happen, which was lovely. So there are not going to be any buttons in the collar, it's just going to close with a brooch. This was a standard way of closing the tops of your dresses in the 1800s. However, I still do need to put in another button on the vest itself, so I'm going to slice up another buttonhole there and stitch it closed and put on another button. These buttons are really, really cheap ones that I found at Joann's, but they do look sort of like the enameled or inlaid buttons that were popular in the 1800s and early 1900s. And eventually I might replace these buttons with antique ones, but it's difficult to find 25 matching antique buttons that are not $7,000, so I'll replace them when I can, if I can. Now the bodice is all but finished. It has boning in it and everything. I think it looks very lovely. Maria is wearing it with a shirt underneath. All it needs now is the strap at the back. Oftentimes Victorian waistcoats will have this kind of strap at the back, closed with a buckle, and I wanted to have that too. I wasn't able to find a buckle that was exactly the same as any that I had seen on originals, but I was able to find those things at Joann's, so I hoped that they would work, and I made some strips, some tapes basically, and put that buckle on the edge of one of them and attached them to the waist and hoped that they would work. And it turned out that the buckle thing that I got from Joann's was completely useless, so I ended up having to put a hook and an eye at the edge of the tape to actually keep it closed, because that buckle thing just slid away. It was very, very frustrating. So now the vest is done, and it looks a little bit lumpy on Maria, but that's just because Maria is a little bit lumpy. You are not going to get to see it yet. I'm going to do another grand reveal when I finish the jacket as well. So I hope you stick around. So that was part one. I hope you enjoyed. A big thank you to Kit Kat Stitch and Mary Royal for supporting this channel on Patreon. If you would like to become a patron, there's a link in the description. If you don't, no hard feelings, no worries. I don't want you to become a patron if you don't want to. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you'll stick around for part two, in which I make the jacket. Bye-bye. Also, could you please tell me down below what you think of this new video style that I've been trying out of kind of doing voiceovers? On one hand, I feel like they're a lot more polished sounding than my old method of just kind of talking like this. On the other hand, though, I feel like they're a lot less personal. There's just not as much personality in the voiceovers as there is in the other types. I think mostly because I don't take time to think, and what was I trying to say? Just like I just did. So let me know what you prefer down below, and I will take it into consideration. Okay, bye again.